We now come to the backbench debate on the future of local post office services. Gideon Amos to move.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm first and foremost very grateful to the Honourable and Right Honourable members and everyone in attendance today on a Thursday afternoon to come and discuss post offices and the vital role they have in all our communities across the country. Post offices have long been at the heart of those communities. They provide essential services, they support local businesses, they serve as vital social and economic lifelines. But in too many areas across the country, including my own constituency of Taunton and Wellington, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're faced with uncertainty over the future of those post offices. And we're already seeing erosion of far too many. Post offices contribute an estimated 4.7 billion annually to the UK economy. Their presence generating around an additional 3 billion, according to the Post Office, in spending in surrounding businesses around post offices. Those figures show that in a town such as Wellington, in my constituency, that could add around £1 million to the local economy. Small businesses across the country rely on post offices for banking, cash deposits, parcel services. Nearly a third of SMEs using a post office at least once a week. The benefits of post offices are not just about economics. Of course, they are and they remain a lifeline for many, particularly older and more vulnerable people. They rely on those services to access pensions, send mail and parcels, pay bills, and stay connected. And I hear from many of my constituents how much they value our local post offices. They provide far more than just postal services. I'd like to pay tribute to... yes.
Member for giving way, and I congratulate him on bringing this very important debate today. In my constituents are served by the Crown Post Office on Lordship Lane in East Dulwich and by the Crown Post Office in Brixton. Both of those town centres have seen the effective withdrawal of high street banks from those local town centres. Would he agree with me that the erosion of high street banking services places an even greater emphasis on the role of post offices, and that the government does need to intervene to stop this further round of Crown Post Office closures if we are to see the banking hubs commitment met across the country?
Amos.
The Honourable Member for East Dulwich is absolutely right, and I will be emphasising that point later in my remarks, because the destiny of banking hubs and post offices are wrapped up together. And there's something really important about, in a moment, something really important about post offices providing that sort of nucleus of a town centre. And once that's gone, it definitely undermines the town centre. I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank you, my honourable colleague. And if I could follow on from the honourable lady's point, I represent Tiverton in Minehead. It's a very rural constituency. Dulverton is a classic example where the farmers used to come down from Cutcombe Market after they'd sold their cattle and their sheep, and they'd go into Dulverton and deposit their money in a bank or a post office. We just about have a post office there, but no banks. Would the honourable member agree with me that it is two sides of the same coin?
I would agree with my honourable friend, and I will continue to on with my speech, and will be commenting on that specific aspect of banking as well. As I was saying, I'd like to pay tribute to the friendly and hard-working staff in my own local post office on Station Road and in Staple Grove, and others throughout the constituency. In North Curry Post Office, with its amazing postmistress, they contribute every year to the Christmas in the Square event for the village charity, raising £1,500. So these are real community institutions. Simply being there in our villages and communities to offer a warm, friendly welcome and acting as a community hub is really important to many, many people and mustn't be undervalued. Yes.
I think the honourable member is making an excellent point, and I think this is the nub of his speech, really, is that these post offices aren't just a banking facility or a post office. They are a real community hub. When I think about the ones in my constituency I visited recently in Ramsden Bell House or of Whitmore Way and Basildon, or a brand new one on Billericay High Street, that's exactly what they are. They're places where the entire community comes together.
Gideon Amos.
The honourable member's quite right, and I know Billericay and its post office, and I certainly support his remarks on that. They're simply too important to be lost, aren't they, Madam Deputy Speaker? And we have to ensure that they're not lost in towns like Wellington or Taunton or elsewhere across the country. But too often there are deep concerns about the future of local post offices. Today's announcement, of course, about changes to the Royal Mail Universal Service Obligation add to that uncertainty, creating further pressure on an already fragile network. It's disappointing to see the obligation weakened, with potential knock-on effects on the viability of post offices. So it makes it even more important that post offices continue to play a role all throughout the week in selling stamps, in providing postal services, even if deliveries are being cut back.
On that point, the Honourable Gentleman?
Yes.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for taking the intervention and for the points that he's making. But does he share my concern that in a response to a government answer to a question I raised, more than 1 in 10 post offices, their services are not actually provided in what people would recognise as a post office. They're provided out of the back of a van on a few hours a week. Yet it's held out when we're given the number of post offices and how many people can access them, that they're actually a complete post office service. And that actually in this debate we need to ensure that we can provide a complete post office services in all those communities that need them.
I agree with the Honourable Gentleman, and there is a risk that the statistics are somewhat skewed by the fact that some post offices may be a parcel drop-off point or indeed a van that visits occasionally. Yes.
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way and for his generosity in giving way to a number of members during his important speech. Will he agree with me that the proposal to replace Crown post offices with franchised post offices is no substitute for the Crown post offices, and is in fact a huge risk, because we've seen an announcement earlier this week from WH Smiths, who often are the company that takes on the franchises, that they themselves are closing 17 of their high street branches. So it could be that a move to a franchise is just one step away from complete loss of post office facilities.
Indeed, I think the Honourable Member had read the next sentence of my speech, which was that in Taunton, the branch currently housed in WH Smith on 4th Street, and that business is, of course, potentially up for sale, which poses risks. And loss of post offices like that would be a huge gap, particularly in a county town in Taunton. And I'm sure that would be the case across the country. So could I ask the Minister, in the course of his work, to get concrete assurances from WH Smiths that where they have post offices in their stores, they will be retained following this sale? I think that's a really important point for the government could get assurances from WH Smiths about.
Honourable friend Giveaway.
Yes, I think.
I thank my honourable friend for bringing this debate forward. It's really important. And I think the distinction between the Crown Post Office and the franchise post offices cannot be drawn heavily enough. In my constituency of Newton Abbot, we lost the Crown Post Offices in Newton Abbot, we lost the Crown Post Office in Dawlish, and the one in Teignmouth is now under threat. I believe that to be the last one in my constituency. All the rest are franchises. Does the Honourable Member agree with me that the franchise system can provide a useful service, but is absolutely no substitute for the Crown Post Office full service that must remain?
Gideon Amos.
I agree with my honourable friend from Newton Abbot. I'm sure the government will say in due course that a viable post office is what matters, whatever the exact business model, and there would be some truth in that. But the importance of a secure post office established for the long term is what really matters. And worries, we're hearing across the House, across the country, are not without foundation. We've seen worrying closures across the country, notably, as recently mentioned, the 115 post offices consulted upon for closure recently. Loss of branches means fewer communities can access vital services. House of Commons data shows that the number of post offices is rising, but in regions like the Southwest, they're falling. Southwest having lost more post offices than any other region of England. And Wellington, in my constituency, lost its post office in 2019, and we can see the damage caused by that loss. Wellington is not a small town. It's 15,000 residents and growing fast by a third over the last 2 decades. According to census data, around 1,500 new homes in recent years. It also has a very proud history, Madam Deputy Speaker. The home of Fox Brothers and Company, which has been manufacturing the finest flannels and fabrics for over 250 years in the town, and in fact owned its own bank. Fox's Bank in 4th Street was the last bank in the whole country to issue its own banknotes. For such a town, it's unacceptable to have no main post office. Losing the post office in 2019 has been a real blow. One constituent told me he finds it totally baffling why the post office in Wellington was ever closed. It's particularly difficult for those without access to a car to visit the nearest alternative at Rockwell Green, a village several miles away. If they do, residents often find the sub-post offices there as oversubscribed, queues out the door, and a small village post office, it was only intended to provide for small numbers, and when it's open, parking has become a bit of a nightmare. I give way to...
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and I was very pleased to support his Backbench Business Committee application to secure this debate this afternoon. Does he agree that Crown post offices are one of the last bastions of the civil service in local communities, not centralised? These are good jobs in places like Wellington, as he's describing of his constituency, and that the support that they give to communities, often with an older population, provide an expertise that franchises simply can't.
The Honourable Lady makes a very good point, and I'm extremely grateful to her for enabling us to secure today's debate. And they do really act as hubs for a whole range of services and could provide for a range of public services, and often do, and that's why a secure, proper post office is so important. As I say, the nearest to Wellington is some miles away and very difficult to access. You can imagine then there was great relief when Wellington was told that it would be getting a new hub opened by an organisation called the Post Office, staffed by staff working for the Post Office, and with a logo outside the building with written on it, the Post Office. Only to be disappointed by the fact when you go inside the building you find it's a banking hub that does not provide any post office services. Frankly, people feel somewhat misled and let down that this state of affairs has occurred. And I would like to ask the Minister to instruct the Post Office to review granting Wellington the status of a main post office. I'm convinced that from discussions with franchise holders that would be enough to secure one for Wellington. But better yet, we can all see that in the particular case that I've mentioned, there's an obvious and straightforward solution. We should be allowing banking hubs to offer postal services. We have, there's no fundamental reason why they can't. They already have post office tills, post office systems. They're run by postmasters, they're staffed by mistresses, they're staffed by post office staff. Even the one in Wellington even has 2 banking desks and a space for a 3rd desk, awaiting, presumably, a post office. Would be a very good candidate, I suggest, to occupy the remaining space in the building with post office written above the door. Perhaps most importantly, having spoken to them, they'd be very keen in the post office to offer such services within banking hubs. So the issue lies simply in it not being included as part of the agreement on banking hubs between banks which fund them and the post office which provides those services. It's not a hugely complex problem. I'm sure with a bit of effort and ingenuity, which I'm sure the Minister has and the government has, I'm sure that could be overcome and the system could be made hugely more efficient. There are 76 banking hubs in the UK. We could significantly increase provision of post offices at very little cost. Can I ask the Minister to ask his department seriously to develop incentives for banking hubs to offer postal services in their banking hubs, especially given they all have the post office logo on the building outside the door, even where they don't provide any postal services. To conclude, Madam Deputy Speaker, post offices are vital hubs in our communities throughout the country, particularly for those in need and at risk of exclusion. The loss of the post office in Wellington, such a significant market town in town, has been a real hit, really hit the town centre badly. And I know honourable members will have their own examples of the importance of their local post office to their communities, which I look forward to hearing and maybe intervening on. It is vital to ensure that substantive towns and communities like Wellington do not lose their post offices altogether In short, Madam Deputy Speaker, post offices are too important to be left to uncertainty. Government must act now to safeguard these vital institutions, ensuring that towns like Wellington and so many more do not remain without essential services. I urge the Minister to take tangible steps to secure the future of post offices before more communities are left without them.
The question is as on the order paper, and I am going to start with an immediate time limit of 6 minutes to try and get everybody in. Alex Mayer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I commend the member for Taunton and Wellington for securing this important debate. I think that most members, and indeed most people, are pro-post office. They are, after all, part of the fabric of our nation. Many members of my age were brought up on Postman Pat and his black and white cat. Yeah. And frankly, it wouldn't have been the same without Mrs. Goggins at the local post office. The Leighton Buzzard post office first opened its doors at its current location near All Saints Church back in 1887. Now, I think we all recognise that a lot has changed in the last 137 years, and frankly also since Postman Pat hit our screens in the 80s. I know, for example, how I used to queue at the post office to get my car tax. Emails have transformed the way we communicate. TV licence sales have moved online, or to phone or direct debit. But what hasn't changed is the way that post offices foster a sense of community pride. Half of UK consumers say that their local post office creates a sense of belonging and community identity. An Association of Convenience Stores survey ranked the post office third in terms of having a positive impact on local communities. Post offices also drive footfall to our high streets, because when someone goes to the post office in the town centre, they often spend money elsewhere. More and more, post offices support e-commerce, and they're really important to small businesses, half of which use them at least once a month. And increasingly, they're a really important and vital means of accessing cash. Since 2015, my constituency has lost 60% of its bank branches, and in recent months, 2 more high street banks, Lloyds and Halifax, have left Leighton Buzzard town centre. Halifax was in fact explicit in September when it announced its closure that it expected the post office down the road to take up the slack. Now, whether that will be possible, I will turn to shortly. I was proud to stand on a Labour manifesto committed to strengthening the post office network. I welcome the government's £37 million investment to support post office branches, along with the £20 million boost to sub-postmasters' pay, and the plans to publish a green paper seeking public views on the future of the post office. This all comes at a critical time. The 100-plus-year-old Leighton Buzzard post office is a Crown post office. Now, the desire of the post office to move to a fully franchised model is not new news. It has been on the cards for some time. But it is causing understandable concern for local people who value the service that it provides so deeply for all of the reasons that I have outlined. I welcome the fact that there have been expressions of interest in taking on those Crown branches, and while not all of those applications will be viable, it is encouraging that third-party operators are willing to step in, potentially integrating retail elements to make these branches more financially sustainable. However, as the member for North Durham mentioned previously, the recent announcement by WH Smith, which hosts around 200 post office counters, has raised concerns about whether third-party takeovers truly are a long-term solution, and I would be grateful for the Minister's views on this. I'd also be keen for him to explore with the Post Office whether there is merit in treating Crown branches where the Post Office own the freehold of the building differently from where they lease the premises. Briefly now on a related issue, post boxes. Some new developments, Madam Deputy Speaker, just simply do not have them. It means that if you live, for example, in Bidwell West, you have to go on a half-hour hike to post a letter. Now, the law states that residents should be within 500 metres of a post box, but this is simply not happening. So perhaps the Minister might raise this with the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government to help ensure that housing developments include post boxes as standard. After all, letters are rather vital for a thriving postal service. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Post Office is a national institution. It brings essential services to countless communities, whether it's sending a parcel, withdrawing cash, or topping up an electricity meter. It supports local businesses, high streets and local identity. Yes, it must change, but it must not wither. We need to ensure that local people can enjoy a first-class service.
Rebecca Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In September 2021, Plymstock Post Office closed. It was part of the collateral damage of Morrison's newsagent closure of over 80 newsagents. A legitimate business decision, no doubt, but it highlights the issue of the post office franchise model. They just disappeared from the high street. What followed was a public petition that I started, huge public disappointment, an older population still used to using cash. The next closest post office wanting to retire, one bank left with one cash machine and the nearest cash machine 10 or 15 minutes walk away. And importantly, the loss of an anchor at a shopping centre that is vital for the local community. So working closely with the post office and local businesses, we sought to secure a new post office, but there is a challenge to make the franchise business model work, and that's going to be even harder with the increased employers' national insurance that businesses now face. Now, I raised this with the Minister today. He gave me a very helpful answer, and he raised the increase in the sub-postmaster pay offer, but there remains the issue that we are not replacing closing post offices on a like-for-like basis. Plymstock had a 3-counter model which has been replaced, or the offer by the post office is for a post office local franchise, with the offer just being £15,000 to £18,000 a year for that service to be run within an existing or proposed business. So that means you have to add on rent, business rates, staff, setup and running costs, because at the moment there are no businesses on the Broadway where it was located who were able to take it on. There's also a challenge with the franchise model where often additional services are not able to be tagged on at the beginning, which would make the business profitable. So, for example, passport processing isn't always offered at the start, and those sorts of extra services could often be the difference between a business model that will work and one that is unsustainable. Now, ironically enough, on the 22nd of May, the day the general election was called, I met again with the post office some 2-3 years later to discuss again the issue. And they raised the statistics with me of what was needed. They showed that they thought the use for the post office in the area would increase over time, but they wouldn't take into account the fact that we had a neighbouring postmistress seeking to retire. So at the moment, the data showed that they didn't need anything more than a post office local, but all it took was a tiny bit of horizon scanning to realise that there was going to be that need and that demand shortly. So we got really stuck in a bit of a catch-22 situation. Indeed, that day they reassured me they had further people interested in running the post office, but nearly a year later, nothing has come to fruition. The fight continues. However, as has been mentioned already by other honourable members, there is the option of banking hubs, and obviously the work of the Conservative government to trailblaze this modern solution for communities has helped remarkably, and I'm sure we're going to hear lots about that this afternoon. Particularly, yes, of course, thank you.
Just to reinforce the point that the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington made, is that there's a real concern that communities that now are looking to have a banking hub don't actually have a functioning post office in the way that we would understand it. And does she agree with me that the actual arrival of a banking hub is actually the opportunity to put a post office as well back into those communities?
Thank you for that intervention, and I absolutely agree, and I think we're all going to agree around the room today that that is vital, being able to have a post office within these banking hubs. We've seen 76 across the country opened in the last few years. There's clearly an appetite, there's clearly a need, but it doesn't make sense to the public, as has been alluded to already, that you pitch up, it says post office outside, and they can't even buy a stamp inside. So I am also very much hoping that that can be rectified. So obviously the other challenge is you can't have a banking hub unless while there's still a bank present, which I have to say perhaps is a silver lining on yesterday's announcement, which was that the Lloyds Bank at the same location on Plymstock Broadway is closing in November. A massive hit, the only cash machine for the entire community. But as I've already been saying to my constituents, perhaps the silver lining that means we can see more banking available, and if the government heeds our calls today, that future post office as well. Perhaps we have to circumvent the system to get what we want. means we can now explore a banking hub and retain those banking services. Now, clearly there's a long way to go, and I'm sure there are members in this chamber today who have secured banking hubs, and I am told it takes a big fight, but most of us are also here because we are campaigners. And so as far as I'm concerned, within an hour of that announcement yesterday of Lloyds Bank closing, it was out to the press. We're going to do all we can to get a banking hub. But I want to be able to reassure my constituents that this is going to solve the lack of a post office as well. So I do hope we can see that policy change. So there's a long way to go. We have to secure a venue, we have to secure an operator, and we do have to secure that policy change to see post office services. But yesterday I shared this, and since then there has been huge local interest. People are really getting this idea of a banking hub. They're on board. It's what the community are wanting. I've had 2 conversations already with potential operators, one of which I know runs a service in a neighbouring constituency and is doing a really good job there. So we have the interest, we have businessmen and women who want to do this, but that franchise model has not been something that they've been able to deliver, but it seems that the banking hub model they can. So we want to see this delivered, because even the shopping centre knows that to get the footfall for all the other local businesses, having a bank and a post office in cash is vital. Indeed, even the local library needs that cash access, and if that's not available, there's going to be a problem. So those vital services and amenities that local people need is why we need to be securing this banking hub. So I will say to my constituents in South West Devon, particularly in Plymstock today, you have my absolute commitment to fighting for this. I would just say, though, we also have some fabulous small community post offices in our villages. It's not all a bad news story. Newton Ferris shop, for example, has a fabulous post office counter within it, and I know that there are attempts made right across our constituencies to deliver these services for our constituents. However, where there is a problem like we're facing today with these closing banks and closing main branches, we do need to step up and take action. So to close, I'd just like to ask a few questions of the Minister, if I may. I think I've highlighted the reality of the current post office offer, and as I've said, it's not all bad, but and he has kindly said I can share these details about my constituency with him, which I will certainly do, but I think it would be good to get the answers on the record in the chamber. Does the Minister accept that the downgrades of service from, say, a main branch to a franchise local service hinders the replacement of post office services? Will he explore the fact that the current post office data set doesn't allow for future? You know, if a retirement is coming down the road, we should be able to business plan around that, and at the moment we can. And can you reassure the House that he remains committed to delivering banking hubs, and will they incorporate postal facilities so that we can deliver for our constituents? Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker.
Anna Gelderd. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for securing today's debate. This is an important issue for constituencies across the UK, as highlighted already by contributions across the House. However, it is a particular concern to constituencies in South East Cornwall due to the potential closure of our Liskeard post office. It's not just the loss of a building, this is the loss of a vital service in the heart of our community if it were to go ahead. And, as the daughter of a postman, I know just how hard and how important a job it is that they do. For many in rural areas like mine, the post office is more than a place to send letters. With the loss of high street banks leading only one provider, as we've heard, it has become a financial lifeline, and it ensures that residents, especially older residents, or those without online banking and small businesses, can access cash and essential services without having to travel for miles. Without a clear alternative in place, it represents a real challenge. For many, reaching the next nearest branch is simply not practical in rural areas like mine. If closures like this continue, we must ensure that further banking hubs are established so that rural communities are not left behind. Driving growth is a key aim for this government, and I welcomed the £28 million investment in Cornwall outlined by the Chancellor's statement yesterday. I know that long-term growth cannot happen without the basic services that underpin our local economies, and Labour was elected across the UK in rural, coastal and urban areas alike, because people want practical solutions after 14 years of decline. They want to ensure that communities are not cut off from essential services, and I look forward to working with our government to do just that. My goal is to make the lives of local residents in South East Cornwall easier and more prosperous. That means protecting local services, ensuring accountability, and delivering real opportunities for growth in towns like Liskeard. I urge the government to ensure that rural communities are not left stranded and guarantee access to essential banking and post office services, I'm sure as they will. Thank you. Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friend for Taunton Wellington on taking the initiative to secure this time, and indeed for the way in which he opened our debate. We're all probably familiar with the old maxim, if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. I've kind of lost count of the number of post office debates that I've been part of over the years, and it seems to me that as far as post office is concerned, the maxim that has governed government thinking of all colours has been, if it ain't broke, then keep reforming it until it is. The fundamental problem here is that there has been an incoherence of approach within government departments. On the one hand, we have heard, and I suspect we may hear similar things again from the Minister today, Minister standing at the dispatch box saying that the Post Office is a brilliant institution and it can be the front office, the front desk for government services in communities right around the country. And then the next day you will have another Minister standing at the dispatch box telling us that access to government services will become digital by default. And unless we decide exactly what role we expect our post offices to perform in our communities, then you can't be surprised when you find that they fail to thrive and wither in the way that they're doing. It's over 20 years now since the Department for Work and Pensions thought that they could save money by driving people away from getting pensions and other benefits from their local post office. That doubtless was a saving for the Department for Work and Pensions, but it's just meant that the Department for Trade and Industry, or Business, and whatever we call it these days, has had to put more money in government subsidies. And I'm pretty sure, I hesitate to predict the future in politics at all these days, but one day, when we have finally turned the key to lock the last post office in the country, there will be some bright spark in Downing Street somewhere who will come up with a policy paper saying that we should have a hub in every community where people can access government services, meet their postal needs, their banking needs, and all the rest of it. And in that way, we will end up reinventing what we have reformed into the point of destruction. I have to say that Post Office themselves, in the way that they interact with the sub-postmasters, have not always helped in relation to that. The innovations that they bring in, like the pick-up and drop-off initiatives, for example, in my constituency, it's not the sub-post offices that are given the contract to do the pick-up and drop-off points. So, you know, if the post office at the heart are not able to support the sub-postmasters at the front line, then frankly we can't be surprised if they start to fail. In particular today, though, I want to talk about the approach of the Post Office in relation to the closure of Crown branches. And in particular, we see this in my constituency, where the last Crown Post Office in Cornwall is listed for closure. The way in which this has been done by the Post Office has been nothing short of a disgrace. It has been totally lacking in respect for their own employees and for the communities that they are there to serve. At a time when you would have hoped that the Post Office might be willing or wanting to demonstrate a change of culture for reasons that we've debated often enough, to see them still behaving in this way in my community makes me think that actually all the fine words about changed culture within the top of the Post Office are simply weasel words and absolutely meaningless. I've seen this before. We lost to the Crown Post Office in Lerwick in Shetland a few years ago. It was taken out, the Crown Post Office. It was folded into local newsagent service for all the promises that were given about maintaining the services. In fact, what the community was left with at the end of the day was a much inferior service, despite the best efforts of the newsagent that got the contract to host it. So if we are to see these changes, then we need to know, first of all, that the same range of services will still be available as there are from a Crown Post Office. So things like vehicle licensing, currency exchange, passport checking, all these things should still be available. But just as importantly as the range of services, there is the question of the physical infrastructure. There is something which people want from a standalone post office of the sort that you get with the Crown Post Office, especially when we're encouraging banking into them. That's highly personal service for many, many people, and they don't want to be doing that right next to somebody who's buying a tin of beans and their weekly paper. So the size and availability of any post office that is to replace the one that they want to close in Kirkwall is absolutely critical. We don't want to have people queuing round the block at Christmas when the post office is at the busiest, standing in the rail in the heat, the sleet and the snow to get their postage done. So the size, the range of services and the quality of service really has got to be at the heart of anything that comes from the post office by way of revision. That is the basis on which we, in my community, shall be judging any proposals with which they come forward. Thank you.
Neil Coyle.
Mr Speaker, and pleased to have supported the member for Taunton and Wellington in securing this debate. Not the first time I've helped him, having house sat for him over 20 years ago. I think 22, but he's welcome to correct the record if I've got the dates wrong, in a funny quirk of fate. Can I start by thanking my London Bridge Post Office manager Priya and her dedicated team, including Clive and the CW members who I'm proud to serve. They in turn support and serve the London Bridge and Borough High Street community in extremely busy circumstances with massive footfall, why there's so much concern, as demonstrated on the petition that the London Bridge and West Bermondsey councillors Emily Hickson, Sam Dalton, Sunil Chopra have put out. Hundreds of people have already signed that petition to save the post office, and it's on change.org if anyone else wants to add their signature. I went on site formally 2 weeks ago to see the team and saw for myself how busy and loved it was. My constituent Mary was in there paying a rent at the time. She's a lovely older lady, but it isn't just older ladies using post offices, because this post office demonstrates the diverse range of post offices affected across the country, in that it is hugely busy. It serves a massive and vibrant business community at Borough Market and around London Bridge, and of course it has London's 4th busiest train station right on the doorstep, providing commuter customers on Borough High Street. And I went in because of the question mark put about this, the status of this branch specifically, and I thank the Post Office for answering some of my questions and for joining me on that visit, but it's disappointing to be in this position, and not least because we do have a new ministerial team, and government ministers have stated 50 million additional funding to help, and that there remains a commitment from the government to ensuring every community has access to a post office branch, which is incredibly welcome. I am also proud to have stood and won on a manifesto last year that said Labour will look for ways to strengthen the network in consultation with sub-postmasters, trade unions and customers. And I'm glad that the government formally recognises that, and I quote directly, the UK-wide post office branch network is an essential part of the UK's economic infrastructure supporting high streets and businesses. That is incredibly refreshing after years of mismanagement and mixed messages from mixed ministers since 2010, including across 2 different parties. It's really useful to see this specific Minister for Service and Small Businesses in his place today. We may disagree over the course of the Six Nations on one particular issue, but I know he's been a massive champion of post offices and has said on record that the post office should do more when it comes to providing banking services. He has been a doughty champion for the co-op political parties, champion of post office having a broader banking and financial footfall, whether it be a credit union or banking, and I hope to hear more from him today on those issues. Like posties, he now has to deliver in office as a minister, thank you. And I also hope that we'll hear when the Green Paper will be coming forward, and I think the aim is by the end of July. And I really hope that Link and the Access to Cash campaign already linked into that discussion, and perhaps within the Green Paper there'll be space to talk about the future of business rates for post offices and whether there could be a community interest exemption. But I wanted to flag up a couple of concerns about how London Bridge has been handled by the Post Office today. It's an incredibly small team, less than 10 full-time equivalents. They are incredibly busy, but they have met every target set by the Post Office, including a currency transfer increase last year of more than 20%, and we are talking millions of pounds. They've taken on additional services where possible, but the services they have lost have been the responsibility of the Post Office nationally and not the local branch. They feel blamed for national post office failures, sadly. Rent is also not their responsibility. They do not determine the rent they pay for a Borough High Street prime location. It is very disappointing that the Post Office did not seek a rent reduction in 2020. I've lived in Southwark for 20 years. Rents fell for commercial premises and residential during the COVID crisis for the first time in my living in the borough, but the Post Office failed to negotiate or seek a reduction. That is not the responsibility of the individual staff who now feel that being held culpable for a failure that sits elsewhere. It is hard to imagine an equivalent site that would be cheaper locally. If they move away from that high street location, they lose the business and they lose the commuter footfall, and it could reduce turnover, and those who are making decisions need to be mindful of this. And, as has already been mentioned by the member for Orkney, there is a lack of respect for customers and for the workforce in how this has been handled. And specifically for this site, where the website said an alternative provider was available on Blackfriars Road. Well, the Post Office shut that post office 2 years ago this month. It was supposed to reopen, and the Post Office told me they had bidders for it last summer. Since my visit 2 weeks ago, the Post Office have now stated they will not be reopening the Blackfriars Road site at all, which is a massive disappointment for many in SE1 and the local area. The failure to communicate that, again, not a local responsibility, but a lack of respect. And the Post Office is supposed to use a principle of community engagement code in how it handles these issues. It has not been the case in Blackfriars and must not be broken again. And I wanted to flag up in this debate, for people who are worried about this specific site, that there is a lot of interest in running it with an alternative provider, but this must not come at a loss of services, must not mean a loss of rights for the workforce that the state picks up further down the line. All costs must be taken into account. And that when more is known, we think in April, I'll organise a public meeting with local representatives of Post Office, CW and others, which I'll advertise and distribute as soon as I can for everyone worried about this great community asset.
Gavin Mohindra.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I congratulate the member from Taunton and Wellington for securing this backbench business debate. Can I also thank Nick Frost and Emily Pigeon from my office for doing the research for this and other speeches that I've done in recent days. We all know that post offices are critically important community assets to our communities. I know that, Madam Deputy Speaker, your own one of Romsey is under threat as a main hub, and I know you don't actually have the ability to voice that, so on your behalf I shall do at this point. But I'm lucky enough to represent 7 post offices in South West Hertfordshire. In my first term as a Member of Parliament in South West Hertfordshire from 2019, Chorley Wood Post Office had actually been closed, not for headquarters reasons, there was a local issue there, but it took several years before that post office was brought back online, and I thank Lords, the retailer, for incorporating the post office into their retail area to ensure that my community could continue to access the excellent services that the post office offers. We saw during the global pandemic how actually community assets and community spirit was critical for the health and well-being of our residents. I think they are unsung heroes in our communities. Most post office staff will see their regulars on a obviously frequent basis and will quickly identify if they've not been seen or don't look well, and will, while not a professional like a pharmacist or optician or GP, would be an ear and an eye to just keep a view on how their particular customers are doing. But in terms of the post offices themselves, we've seen with various announcements both recently and over the last few years the demise of high street banks. I'm a former furniture retailer, and it still makes me sad that the high streets are not what they once were. And if we do not continue to support post offices, which remain one of the few beacons left in high streets up and down our country, while there's an absolute draw to online retail, and I'm a free marketeer, we will live to regret it if we don't protect those assets that we really, really care about today. And I include the post office in that. I know my community cares about this as well, because when Croxley Green was under threat, I got a lot of correspondence asking me to be proactive. Fortunately, the post office decided to stop their plans to review that particular post office. But I think that was just the tip of the iceberg. And I know from other colleagues speaking today and yesterday that their inbox is getting full with concerns from their constituents about what they value. And it's the silent majority that will be adversely affected if we don't speak up and support our post offices today. I fully support the move towards banking hubs. I think it makes sense to ensure that communities are drawn to critical assets like the post office. But I would urge the Minister to give reassurance to the House. From my understanding, that the Post Office, the agreement for the Post Office to provide banking hubs ends at the end of this year. So if he can reassure the House that if that is the case, he will look into it and ensure that the Post Office quickly gets into negotiation with the retail banks to make sure that they are viable. And with more and more people having less access to cash, the Post Office remains one of the few community hubs and areas where a constituent can always go and get cash out. But it's not all easy for the Post Office. I don't want to get party political, but they will now have a £45 million additional bill from National Insurance, jobs tax, and there has been a significant increase in business rates within their estate. So while technology and the drive for technology is important, the government, in my view, does need to look at how they support places like the Post Office to ensure that they remain commercially viable, because I can assure him that he will have my support if he's able to do so. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Ben Coleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful to the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington for securing this timely debate, and I was glad to have the opportunity to support him in doing so. Our Honourable Members have described quite powerfully the closures that are happening in their constituency, and in my own constituency of Chelsea and Fulham, the last remaining post office in the historic King's Road is threatened. It's a long time, Madam Deputy Speaker, since the King's Road heyday of the swinging 60s, when Please Mr Postman was first a hit. And unfortunately, since then, the number of post office branches in this, what is a very long road, have dwindled, so there's only now one left. And shockingly, this is one of 108 directly managed branches across the country which the post office is planning to shut, 32 of which are in Greater London. They say they're doing this to save money. I hope they're not doing this to pay for the costs of resolving the Horizon scandal. We perhaps will find out over time. But meanwhile, we have the King's Road Post Office, which offers a full, buzzing, full-service offering to lots of customers, very regular queues. Whenever I go in there, I have to wait 10 minutes to be served. People love the staff, and they tell me how worried they are by the possibility of it closing, how incredulous they are this could even be considered. And they depend on it. There simply aren't other options nearby. And while all sorts of people go there, and as my honourable friend the Southwark mentioned, it is particularly older and disabled people who rely on the post office services for bill payments and access to cash. They're really the most worried. And round the corner from this post office, indeed, there are a number of sheltered and retirement housing blocks. And these people who live there will be disproportionately affected. So when I launched a petition, immediately on hearing what was planned, I was not surprised to get 1,000 signatures in a very short space of time, and lots of other people have got in touch with me to express their disappointment and their dismay and their concern. So I met the post office management early in December, and I left them in no doubt about the anger and the shock in the community, and they said that the King's Road Post Office was losing money. They did say they might consider franchising it out to a retail partner or an independent partner, postmaster, but no decision had been taken yet. So they said it was losing money, so I quite naturally asked to see a full, detailed analysis of the figures, and they very kindly responded that they would let me have this in the new year, which we're now in, and I'm going to be seeing them again next week, and I'm going to be pressing them to do that when I see them then. But I would have to say I would expect not just to see the financial reasons for any decision to close the post office in the King's Road. We also need a detailed impact assessment of how the change would affect the community and what steps would be taken to mitigate this. Because, of course, the number of customers matters, but so does the type of customer that the post office serves. And I've touched on this, but we cannot just brush aside the needs of older and disabled people, people who don't feel comfortable banking online, people who prefer to use cash. We cannot let some people feel that they're seen as less important, because they aren't less important. We can't let them feel they're being left behind. They must not be left behind. We need to find a solution that serves the needs of everyone. And that's why it's so important to me that the post office consults genuinely, authentically with the local community about the change, and I'm going to be seeking clarity on that as well. And lastly, in this meeting, I'm going to try and get clarification about their thinking on keeping the King's Road Post Office open by franchising it out. And I've heard the concerns that honourable members have expressed about franchising, but I'd say if it proves to be the only option, and we are a long way off that. I intend to pitch in. I intend to do all I can to make a success for my constituents. You know, Madam Deputy Speaker, when in the Fulham part of my constituency we lost a major post office in the North End Road, I worked very closely with the local council to support a new franchisee to come in, and I was delighted to open a new post office in the North End Road last year. And this is a franchise, yes, but it provides a 7-day-a-week service from 9 in the morning to 9 in the evening. With these extended, the full range of services, even newspaper delivery, which doesn't happen very much. And I was there just last week, and they are thriving, and they're very popular, and people feel well served. But I have to say, while this is good news for the people of Fulham, I can't help wondering how it is that the post office management has to go down the franchising route. Why are directly managed branches so much more expensive to run than locally franchised branches? Maybe the Minister will be able to shed some light on that, but I'll be asking the Post Office. But I should say to the Minister that I'm also delighted by the work that the government's doing and its determination to revitalise our high streets. I welcome the money that's gone into the post office. I welcome increasing postmasters' pay. And I look forward to the Green Paper later this year, setting out options for the future of the post office. It would be helpful to get clarity at this stage on what the government's long-term aims are. Is it to ensure a thriving network of post offices still? I do hope so. Will banking services feature in the Green Paper? Interesting ideas raised here today. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I can assure my residents in Chelsea that I will continue working with them, with the Post Office and the government to fight the closure of the King's Road branch and to ensure that nobody is left behind. Thank you.
Yeah. Olly Glover.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I join colleagues in thanking my honourable friend, the member for Taunton and Wellington, for securing this debate and the support of the Backbench Committee in tabling it. Post offices, as many colleagues, members have said, form a vital part of our local communities and high streets, with millions of people depending on them. And in my Oxfordshire constituency of Didcot and Wantage, with many villages, post offices are under threat. And as has been noted, these post offices are community hubs that play host to a number of vital services for both local people and small businesses, particularly in those rural areas. And they offer a vital human contact and offer information and support for people who might otherwise be isolated, particularly given suboptimal rural transport links. As an example, just this week, postmistress Karen Foreman in Blueberry tells me she was contacted, of course, about many postal matters. But speaking to the Honourable Member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard's point, a lost cat, a lost bunch of keys, and helping someone locate their bank card. As other members have noted, a lot of post offices are facing rising operating costs, and the services they offer do not generate much revenue, making it hard to keep the lights on, with an estimated 1.7 pence per transaction in revenue. But we can do a lot more to support our community branches, and as the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland has said, post offices can provide vital local services, but only if they are properly supported and invested in and staffed appropriately. So, for example, could we do more with post office hubs in terms of enabling people who are digitally excluded to get assistance booking medical appointments over the internet, for example, or with services like printing? Of course, we do need to get justice for wrong postmasters, as others have noted, with the flawed Horizon system still being used, and to give more support to the people who've been neglected as a result of that scandal. But in conclusion, Post Office Network and the very hard-working postmasters and mistresses are in dire need of our support in villages such as Blueberry and many others across my constituency and those of others.
Maureen Burke.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank you to the Honourable Gentleman for securing this incredibly timely debate on the future of our post offices. When considering this topic, a few of us have come here today with positive experiences, sadly. Instead, alongside our constituents, we are concerned about the declining presence of the post office in our communities. In recent times, the post office has been in the news for all the wrong reasons, with no worse example than that of the Horizon IT scandal. A shameful, unforgivable wrong done to 900 postmasters, which undermined the public faith in the service. But sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, public faith in the post office has been betrayed in other ways too. The recent speculation on the future of direct directly managed branches has caused genuine panic and concern for my constituents. I appreciate efforts by the Post Office to reassure people that no formal decision has been made yet, but I fully understand why so many of my constituents believe that closure or service reduction is inevitable. So many post offices have already shut their doors across the UK as the directly managed branch model has been replaced. This shift towards franchising has left many communities fearing that the post office is no longer a permanent fixture in their streets or shopping centres. That's because what was once a simple public service has increasingly had its future decided by profitability rather than the needs and demands of the community. And yet, for my constituents, the post office is more than just a place to send parcels and letters. It represents trusted and valued institution. It's why the post office has been around for nearly 400 years. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, when post office officials emailed me to say that directly managed branches were flawed because they had, and I quote, no retail offering, it felt as though there was disconnect between those who use the service and those who manage it. The number one duty of the post office should be to provide a public service. Whether retail offerings are available in addition should be a secondary consideration, not something motivating the closure of outsourcing these branches. And given news that WH Smith, who have managed around 200 post offices, are looking to sell all their high street stores, the franchising model ought to be reviewed as a matter of urgency. Madam Deputy Speaker, I was already concerned about the future of our post office, but this news only compounds these fears. As with the directly managed branches, my thoughts are with those employed in these WH Smith branches who will be feeling anxious about what this news means to them. I know that the post office officials have confirmed that they are in talks with relevant trade unions regarding the ongoing consultation, but I sincerely hope that these are genuine discussions and that the concerns of the workforce are listened to carefully. In an area like Springburn with a high unemployment rate, already it would be absolutely unacceptable for local jobs to be lost. The Springburn Crown Post Office is the last directly managed branch in my constituency. It occupies a space in Springburn Shopping Centre, which is a well-known, connected, well-used by people across the north-east of Glasgow. I recently met with the community group Spirit of Springburn to discuss the future of the Crown Post Office. The community are rightly worried about what closure would mean and raised with me their concerns about the detrimental impact it would have not just Springburn but the wider north-east of Glasgow. Sorry. They reminded me that not long ago the Springburn area had 4 bank branches. All of those branches have now closed. A familiar story in constituencies across the UK, with the last government presiding over 9,500 bank branch closures. In itself, these closures cause massive damage to our high streets and shopping centres and made banking much more difficult for too many. Madam Deputy Speaker, when these closures occurred, the post office was always the designated place for people to continue to access their bank. In fact, yesterday, when Lloyds Bank announced plans to close its own high street stores, they said that people should use the post office to continue using banking services. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, how can people do this if there are no local post offices left? The reality is the Springburn Crown Post Office really is the last bank in town, and now even that is at risk. It is profoundly unfair for my constituents to find themselves in this worrying situation, and they deserve urgent reassurance that the Springburn Post Office will not close. That is the appeal I am making to the Government today. and it is also the case being made by the local community. Indeed, the Vice-Chair of Spirit of Springburn, Emma Porter, has written to the Secretary of State for Business and Trade to do just that.
The Honourable Lady will recognise that she was on a time limit, and in order to accommodate all of the other honourable members who wish to speak, I'm going to reduce it to 5 minutes. Matt Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the honourable members for bringing this important debate forward today. For generations, the local post office has been the beating heart of our towns and villages. That is certainly the case in Stockton and Thornaby. It's been more than just a place to send and receive mail. It's been a cornerstone of community life, a trusted space where people access essential services, stay connected with loved ones and support their businesses. Yet today we stand at a crossroads. The pressure of modern technology, financial constraints and shifting consumer habits have placed our post offices under real threat. All those challenges made so much worse by the government's national insurance tax raid and their slashing of business rates relief. There are currently threats to the future of the post offices in both Stockton and Thornaby. In Stockton, our post office has changed location over the decades, but has been ever present and ever valued. It was hoped that a franchise in a retailer could protect its future. But across the country, the impact of the national insurance tax raid and the slashing of business rates relief are seeing retailers forced to close stores and axe jobs. In Stockton and Yarm, the impact is being compounded by the Labour Council's introduction of short-stay parking charges. Retail is one of the most important sectors in the country. It's the largest private sector employer in our economy. It often sits at the very heart of our communities and is the biggest social mobility driver around. But in the last few weeks, we've seen fantastic retail giants like Sainsbury's and Tesco's axing jobs and killing opportunities. In Stockton, we've heard the sad news of the WH Smith's closure. The Smith store has hosted the post office and now looks set to close its doors as a result of the government's war on high streets. I've met with the post office to share concerns and the very real impact this will have for so many of my residents, particularly the elderly. The current post office is not due to close until May, and they've committed to working with me to look at alternative franchisees and locations in the town. I'm delighted that a number of potential operators have already shown an interest. In Thornaby, the situation remains concerning but unclear. The local postmaster has an existing lease, but the community were recently shook when a planning application went forward for a Pizza Hut to take its place. The community spoke, putting forward their objections, and the application was rejected. There are now fears of an appeal. I've engaged with the post office and the town centre on it again as recently as this morning, and hope remains that we can find a way forwards. The post offices in Stockton and Thornaby are essential. Their closure would not simply mean the loss of a building, it means the loss of convenience, social interaction, footfall to the town centre and economic stability for many. With the recent announcement that NatWest are closing its Stockton branch, our post offices are absolutely vital to our local towns. I'm determined, hopeful and will do everything I can to keep the doors open on our post offices in Stockton and Thornaby. Thank you.
Luke Akehurst.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Taunton and Wellington for securing this debate, which is incredibly timely, as has been shown by the number of honourable members wishing to participate. Not least because, coincidentally, I'm presenting a petition to the House later today about the potential closure of Chesterley Street Post Office in my constituency of North Durham. Chesterley Street is one of the 115 Crown Post Offices at risk of closure following Post Office Limited's announcements that it is reviewing the future of its directly managed branches. This is worrying not only for those who are employed in these branches, but for the many people who use post office services and for the High Street, or in Chesterley Street we would say the Front Street businesses that rely on the footfall and passing trade that post offices bring. The post office in Chesterley Street has been at the heart of the community in North Durham since 1936. Indeed, the date of its opening means it's one of only a tiny number of post offices that bears the cipher of King Edward VIII. Chesterley Street has lost most of its high street banking branches in recent years, and so it's more important than ever that this vital hub and delivery office remains open and accessible for my constituents. Over 650 people have signed the petition that I will be tabling this evening, calling on the Post Office to ensure that the Chesley Street branch remains open. The Post Office's corporate website rightly describes itself as, quotes, an anchor of UK communities for centuries, and it is, quotes, driven by a strong social purpose to be here in person for the people who rely on us. Well, I couldn't agree more. That's why we must ensure in Chesley Street and elsewhere in places that other honourable members have mentioned this afternoon that these branches remain open, to use the words that are on that corporate website, in person, on our high streets, in our town centres, providing the services that local people rely on.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. All of us, as we grew up wherever across the United Kingdom, surely amongst the things that we remember as children was the post office. And I think also our parents imbued in us that in a changing world, one of the things that you could rely on and trust is the post office. For many reasons, one of which is the staff, long-standing, long-serving, and always interested. In particular, amongst all our communities in rural areas, and in my constituency of Boston and Skegness, we have many rural areas, but the importance of the staff in villages, in small towns, in those communities, particularly for people, for elderly people, for people with disabilities, vulnerable, to use certain services. And of course, when we grew up, we didn't have digital things, but we do now. But actually, there's another thing amongst the many brilliant contributions today, which is those staff, they know their customers, and they know those who are healthy, those who might be struggling. But also, if someone doesn't appear on their regular day, their timely slot, they might just say, "Where's Mrs. Smith?" And that's a massively important part of our communities. And so it's not just about money. It's about the asset value within that community of what post offices give us. And that's why, as we all know about the front office, what we see in front of us, I think we've all been let down. And those post offices on the front line have been let down by decades of mismanagement. So in my constituency, in Boston itself, it's had a franchise with WH Smith, and yes, that is closing and has caused great consternation. Great consternation. Sadly, because frankly, WH Smith itself as a retailer has not been well managed. And so people are concerned when the replacement will be much smaller. And people cannot understand why services are being withdrawn. If we're trying to make post offices more viable, then surely they should have more services, not less. So in the post office in Swineshead, in my constituency, the operators, the owners cannot understand why services like the sale of premium bonds, fishing licences and the likes, paying HMRC, paying tax, national insurance, why that has all been withdrawn. That makes them less viable. And it feels to me that all our communities, towns, villages, tiny villages, they're different. But surely what we should be saying is we need to be massively flexible. So whether the post office is a standalone, whether it's a franchise, whether it sits within a library, whether it sits within a village hall. I was delighted when there was a pub in the village hall. Maybe you could have a post office in a pub. I'm expanding. But you see the point. It is the most important part of communities. And it's the elderly, the vulnerable, who need them most. And that's why I do hope this government, amongst all its various other challenges, really remembers that. Actually, this is not about the money. It's about the asset, the community hub of the post office. Thank you, Madam Deputy Chair.
Jessica Toll.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful for the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington for bringing this debate today. Members across the House have spoken eloquently about the importance of their local post office, particularly in a context where high streets across the country are suffering. Shops have closed, banks have left or are leaving the high streets, and it is the post office usually which is the remaining thriving hub of activity on the high street. Now, I'm here to raise concern about my post office, Westbourne Post Office, when last year residents found out from media reports that the future of that Crown Pond post office was uncertain, with no prior consultation and no input from those who use it daily. Many of them wrote to me with their concerns about the loss of such an essential community asset, and I share those concerns with such a popular and well-used service and how that could be lost. So at the end of November, we also launched a petition to save this much-loved post office, and to date we've had more than 2,200 people sign that in the local area. As part of this petition, I asked people to share what they loved so much about the post office and what it meant to them, and I've been inundated with messages from local residents. It's essential to businesses who use it for their services. The disabled and the elderly need it for their banking services, for paying bills, for accessing government services. It always has a queue out the door. It's been described as a lifeline and the heart of this community. And I'd like to, Madam Deputy Speaker, just read out a few of these contributions that we've had, just to give the House a sense of how important it is. Firstly, it is an essential service for so many in the area. I'm disabled and I can't travel further to deal with the things that the post office helps me with. It's nearly always busy with queues out the door. To remove it would be sheer madness. The post office has been open since 1910 and it is an essential part of Westbourne Village. It serves as a vital resource for elderly residents like me who may not know how to use the internet and no longer have any banks in the area. Another one. As a manager of a local charity shop, the post office is integral to our day-to-day running as provides banking opportunities and enables us to send stock. We use it for stationery and supplies. It's a vital part of our community. Now, these are just a snapshot of responses I've received from different sections of the community. And I share these because it shows that the post office is not simply a business, but it is essential to so many who use it. Now, I have heard from the post office that no decisions have been made yet about the future of this branch. Like my honourable friend in Chelsea and Fulham, I've heard that it's losing money, but I haven't seen any evidence of that yet. And I know that they're exploring a franchise model and that there perhaps are potential benefits to that. But I'm grateful for my honourable friend from North Durham for raising the issue with WH Smiths, because we are so concerned locally about this franchise model because our WH Smiths has just closed in the town centre, not far from where this post office branch is. So understandably, there's a lot of scepticism locally about relying on this model when we have just seen the loss of a post office and no plans to replace it despite the high demand for its services. So I welcome the government's commitment to the post office, the financial support that's been outlined, the green paper forthcoming. It shows that the government understands the importance to communities of the post office. And I hope that the Minister in his closing remarks can provide us with reassurance that there will be no impact on the quality of services that communities get at the moment, and that they're exploring all options to provide things like banking services through the hubs or government services in these post offices to make them viable and to keep them in their communities. So I want to reassure my constituents in Bournemouth West, I will continue to fight for this post office, this one in Westbourne and our ones in the town centre.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend for securing this debate. Having asked for a post office debate at Business Questions only 2 weeks ago, I was delighted when he secured this one. In rural areas like my Thornbury and Yate constituency, post offices provide vital services to enable people to live their lives. Since 2015, over 6,000 bank branches have closed across the country, making it harder for people to access their cash and be able to use banking services. And many have been reassured that they can still access these core services through the post office, but now even this is at risk. And I would agree with the honourable member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard about the importance of post offices for e-commerce. When I made my recent visit to my local sorting office, they noted that the Royal Mail is now a parcel delivery service with a sideline in delivering mail. And obviously post offices play an important part in the process, and in doing so support local businesses. So the recent news that the post office was looking to close 115 Crown post offices was a huge blow, and one of those post offices is in Yate. Residents tell me that it feels like a done deal, not a proposal open for discussion. And when I met the area manager, although she said that no decisions had been made, there certainly seemed to be a strong leaning to moving all post offices to the franchising model, with all the risks that people have already mentioned.
Would the Honourable Lady give way?
I would.
Thank the Honourable Lady. Rains Park is an important high street in my constituency. With no banks in Rains Park, our solitary post office is a vital lifeline, allowing local residents and businesses alike to access banking, bill payments, traditional postal services. It's, however, one of the 115 Crown branches at risk, and my constituents are very concerned about the current uncertainty. Does my honourable friend agree the government should be giving assurances now to provide communities with peace of mind, particularly the old and digitally excluded?
Absolutely, I would agree with my honourable friend. Having seen the anxiety that the threat of closure is provoking in my own constituents. So Yate Post Office is very busy, often with significant queues of people waiting to access services, and it's rather unusual in that it shares the space with the local sorting office, who operate out of the second floor of the building. And the quality of service would be negatively impacted if it was squeezed into another existing business. Yates and Shipping Sodbury have lost several banks from the high street, where many are being told, as I said earlier, they could rely on the post office instead. And now even this is at risk, with Yates Post Office being listed by the post office as one seeking to close. Residents are rightly angry about this, with more than 1,000 signing my petition to keep the post office open. And sadly, it is not just the Crown post offices that are threatened with closure. We recently had confirmation that the post office in Cornwall is set to close due to the village shop in which it is based closing. This means that the neighbouring outreach branch in Tiverington, which is overseen by the same postmaster, is also now at risk. The sub-postmaster told me how the post office at Tiverington is busier than Cornwall, fuelled by the fact that nearly all the banks in nearby Thornbury have closed, and indeed Lloyds have added themselves to the list today. Titherington Post Office also has a strong support from customers using Royal Mail services for businesses, as it has a sizable free car park, making it convenient for them to bring their parcels, letters and banking to the post office counter. Despite this, the post office are refusing to allow the Tiverington branch to become a standalone site, and this is causing huge concern for local residents. Tiverington is very well supported, an essential service to the residents, many of whom do not have private cars. There is no public transport in the village, meaning the loss of the post office would leave some people utterly cut off. The post office is based in the thriving community shop, which is run by volunteers and also provides a vital service for the local community. And in the wake of this news, a grassroots petition supporting the post office in Titherington has gained over 800 signatures in just over a week. However, the post office said to me that they would not review their decision because in the area there is a main post office at Thornbury and a local branch at Elverston, and both are within 3 miles of Titherington. This is completely tone deaf and ignores the lack of public transport. What are those without cars meant to do? They have said they are keen to explore a new outreach service and the possibility of a new branch, but all of this will take time, especially as contingent upon finding a new sub-postmaster to do it. And even they admit it is likely the branch will close before an alternative can be found, meaning that in just a few weeks' time there will be no immediate service available in the village. I will obviously be doing all I can to make sure that we do secure a post office service at Tiverington and in Yate. But I would like to ask in closing, does the Minister agree that relying solely on the franchising model of post offices carries risks and that there are benefits to preserving the standalone offices? And will the Minister commit to supporting community outreach post offices based in thriving community shops?
Mark Stewart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington for securing this debate. And I think that my honourable friend, the member for Bournemouth West, has already surmised a lot of the excellent contributions from this side of the House already. So we all know that post office branches are essential for our local communities and the local economy. We know that, that's clear from the debate today. It saddens me to say that this government inherited a post office in such a precarious position. Now, having discussed this with senior post office staff and the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Services, Small Businesses and Exports, I know the organisation is facing serious financial challenges, and I'm very grateful for the government's engagement with me, for the Minister's engagement with me on this issue. Now, obviously, this forms the backdrop for the announcement that the Post Office is considering the future of the remaining 115 directly managed branches, referenced countless times today, with a franchising model being considered for those branches. Now, I have to say, I remain especially concerned about the future of the Morley Post Office on Queen Street. Morley sits in the heart of my constituency. It's a town of around 50,000 people. It is one of the key locations that people come to for financial services and for shops. Now, this directly managed branch is vital for my constituents and those who rely on the services that it provides. And I have been looking for certainty that it will remain on the high street where it belongs. I know the strength of feeling from my constituents. Over 2,500 people have signed my petition to keep it open. It's absolutely clear that after the closure of many bank branches across Morley, this post office is a lifeline for those who need it. Now, the numbers back this up. It's not just my testimony. While other directly managed branches have seen a 34% drop in footfall since 2019 because of the pandemic, the Morley post office is only 3% down. We use our post office. And Madam Deputy Speaker, just a word on bank branches and banking hubs. I have been actively pursuing a banking hub for Morley Town Centre, especially with the recent news that NatWest is due to pull out of the town this year. NatWest even pointed to the post office on their way out and said, don't worry, you have that service there, despite the threat of closure. Now, I have been in touch with Link, one of the organisations that determines who gets banking hubs, and they tell me that Morley does not yet meet the criteria for a banking hub because we still have one branch left in Morley. And while I have many questions about that criteria, we will have to save them for another debate and another time. So while Morley does not currently meet Link's criteria, and while I continue to have those discussions with Link, we can't have a situation where my post office closes. Now, thankfully, Morley's post office continued operation will not prevent us from securing a banking hub in future. So there is no reason why we should not do everything in our power to keep this post office open, and that's exactly what I'm doing. Now, as I've stated, the branch is very much in demand. It's used by local businesses who trade on our high street. Business owners such as Castle Point, who actually own and operate Morley Market, have contacted me directly about their concerns about the branch closing. Post office research also shows that 3 in 10 SMEs use a post office once a week, and whether it's to post parcels to customers or to deposit their cash takings, losing this branch in particular, when it's surrounded by so many businesses in Morley, would make us all worse off. Now, I know the direction of travel for the post office is to move towards this franchising model that we've heard so much about today, and I do remain hopeful that a suitable postmaster will be found to take over the branch. But I'm also clear that the branch should remain on the high street. Having it in an accessible place in Morley Town Centre is very important for both residents and businesses, and I will continue to make that case as strongly as I can. That's why I've requested that those interested in taking over the franchise in Morley make contact with me. I'm keen to support their bids, assuming that they are in the best interests of Morley and the town centre. And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'd like to ask the Minister today if there is any threat to the number of services that a directly managed branch can actually offer if they transition to a franchised branch. And very finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, I just want to reassure all of my communities in Leeds South West and Morley that I'm going to work tirelessly to ensure this branch remains open. It's crucial that the services the post office provides in Morley Town Centre remain there for many years to come.
If there are no further backbenchers wishing to speak, I shall call Clive Jones, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I congratulate my honourable friend for Taunton and Wellington on securing this debate. The contributions throughout have been unified in highlighting that the post office is a focal part of our communities. They are a vital part of our society and our high streets, with millions of people depending on them every week. They are community hubs providing access to communication, banking and other vital services. This is particularly important for those with restricted access, such as older people, or those in more rural populations with little email connectivity. There are villages that fit that exact description in my constituency of Wokingham, such as Finchampstead, Swallowfield and Hurst. That is why I am deeply concerned about the news that 115 branches of the post office may be closed, with around 1,000 jobs at risk of being lost, because it has the potential to not only increase social isolation for some of the most vulnerable groups in the UK. I'm especially concerned by the proposals that the Post Office are reviewing to replace their existing branches. Specifically, they are looking for alternatives to their wholly owned branches and are therefore considering franchise arrangements where a third party could take them on instead. This opens up lots of risks. In my constituency of Wokingham, the post office in Hurst was unexpectedly closed down a few weeks ago. It was located in a shop that many considered a pillar of the community. Through no fault of the post office, the tenants running the shop had to close their doors. Losing a post office can really harm a small village like Hurst, and their proposed solution that people should travel to Wokingham or Twyford to access services is simply not possible for all of the residents. Public transport links are limited, and those who rely on the post office are the least likely to be drivers. By having the post office estate reliant on third parties, they have no control over. There is the worrying potential that situations like that of Hurst will become increasingly commonplace. A future in which losing a local service once means that it is gone forever, and very, very few are replaced once they're gone. There is little chance of appeal, and it is a failure of government policy. This is especially relevant considering the potential loss of 500 W.H. Smith shops across the UK, many of which house post office branches in them, such as the one in Wokingham Town Centre. The High Street is struggling, and the government need to act urgently to turn this around. What steps is the government taking to make sure the post office is on a sustainable footing for the long term? Will the Minister commit to ensuring that none of the 115 post offices close until a consultation with each local community has been undertaken? Has the Minister met with representatives from the post office to draw up plans in case they lose hundreds of their sites due to W.H. Smith's financial issues? That said, it is reported in the BBC today that Ofcom has proposed cutting the delivery of the second-class letters to every other weekday and scrapping deliveries on Saturdays. This will harm services for millions of households and small businesses. Royal Mail executives should be working night and day to turn the company around and to fix the postal service. The new owners agreed to the existing delivery targets when they took over the company, and they should stick to them. I would appreciate if the Minister could address my points and offer reassurances that our communities will receive the great service that they deserve. Finally, post office branches provide a place to do banking for millions of people across the country, and this is the case in Wokingham. But another area of concern for me is the lack of resilience in our local financial services. The W.H. Smith located post office is in Wokingham, and it's too small, and the staff are too busy with all of their other tasks. One constituent had to wait about 45 minutes to withdraw £15. This is why I and local campaigners like Lynn Forbes are really hoping that we can get a banking hub. However, our application has been declined. If W.H. Smith in Wokingham Town Centre was to close, our already limited options would be reduced further. Link, who provide the banking hubs, are encouraged within the current legislation to consider the protection of face-to-face banking, but it is not explicitly empowered to take into account when making a final decision on whether to establish a banking hub or not. Instead, they just focus on cash access. Will the Minister explain why the protection of face-to-face services isn't considered? And will he introduce further legislation to require the protection of face-to-face banking services?
Shadow Minister Harriet Baldwin.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and this has been an excellent debate, and I would like to congratulate the member for Taunton and Wellington for securing it, and thank the Backbench Business Committee for awarding it. Across the debate, we've heard a consistent theme about how the Post Office plays such an important role in communities across our land, providing what I thought was beautifully described by the Honourable Member as friendly access to key services which connect people, which service communities, particularly those without banks, and help those unable to use the internet to connect to government services. In West Worcestershire, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're fortunate to have 31 post offices, including some mobile services, and I would like to put on record my thanks to all those friendly sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses who help provide these services. And in the course of the debate, Madam Deputy Speaker, we heard across the UK from Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, from South West Devon, from South East Cornwall, Orkney and Shetland, Bermondsey and Old Southwark, South West Hertfordshire, Chelsea and Fulham, Didcot and Wantage, Glasgow North East, Stockton West, North Durham, Boston and Skegness, Bournemouth West, Thornbury and Yate, Leeds South West and Morley and Wokingham. And in interventions, we heard also from Newton Abbot, from Dawlish, from Teignmouth, from Basildon, from Billericay, from Dulwich, Tiverton and Minehead. And dare I say, Madam Deputy Speaker, that you feel strongly also about the post office in Romsey, I understand. And therefore, I think we can see just how incredibly valuable this network of friendly institutions is across the country. But I'm afraid to say, and I break it gently to the Government Minister, that Labour's budget of broken promises is threatening the network. Whether it's the National Insurance Jobs Tax, the hike in business rates, or the incoming employment regulations, Labour are hiking the cost of doing business. It means that swathes of post offices are facing tens of millions more in tax and red tape. And these pressures mean that the post office has been forced into assessing the future of over 100 Crown Post Office branches. And rumours abound that when the Green Paper is published, it may consult in a reduction in the number of post offices below 11,500. So can the Minister today put paid to that speculation and tell the House when the Green Paper will be published? In another impact, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Post Office and its network of branches are major employers with over 50,000 full-time equivalent workers. And this means, according to the Institute of Fiscal Studies, that the Post Office itself could face an extra £45 million bill from the national insurance hike. Post offices are often eligible for retail, hospitality and leisure business rates relief, and they face a huge increase in their business rates as relief falls from 75% to 40%. And then the Employment Right bill itself will cost businesses across this country, by the government's own impact assessment, £4.5 billion. Now, with its 50,000 employees, if it's shared proportionately, the Employment Rights Bill will therefore cost the Post Office over £8 million. And you don't have to take this from me. I'm quoting now from the chairman of the Post Office himself, Nigel Railton, who said, "It almost goes without saying, we are a business in need of a fresh start, and urgently, and at the recent budget we saw costs rise with the national insurance contributions, national living wage and business rates." I will give way because I'm sure he doesn't like hearing this news.
It's got nothing to do with hearing the news. I just wonder if the Shadow Minister could remind us how many Crown franchises were lost while she was in government.
Well, I'm just getting to that. He is absolutely on point in terms of where I'm going to, because it was sadly under the last Labour government that the network really shrank in a major way. The number of post offices went into sharp decline and then stabilised in the 2010s. In fact, over the entire time that we were in coalition with our Liberal Democrat colleagues and then in government ourselves, the network remained above that 11,500 number. And it takes action. I think we've heard that this afternoon very clearly to maintain this precious network. I've given way to him once. Thank you very much. I've given way. And the previous government worked to enter into a new partnership with the Post Office. It came up with the idea that we can confirm our identity in person, and this is a way of using that valuable network across the land. We recognise that vulnerable people sometimes struggle to verify their identity online, and we also began this initiative to help communities dealing with bank closures by setting up this network of banking hubs, and I'm pleased to hear the Minister confirm that he will continue backing banking hub delivery through the Post Office earlier today. But does he consider that the framework negotiations between the Post Office and the banks, which are in their final stages, are going well? I'd then like to ask the Minister, 1 year on from ITV's historic programme, Mr Bates versus the Post Office, I want to put on record my thanks to the member for Thirsk and Malton for all he did to address the issues raised in that programme. But can the Minister detail the progress that his government is making on the compensation of sub-postmasters? I want to raise the issue of Fujitsu. Of course, they designed the Horizon IT system, and it has destroyed so many lives and livelihoods. Under the previous government, there had been discussions with Fujitsu about providing a share of the compensation to the victims of the Horizon scandal, and Fujitsu confirmed it will pause bids for government contracts until the public inquiry is concluded. However, this month it was reported that the government has awarded new contracts to Fujitsu. This is something that when the government was in opposition, many of its members of parliament criticised awards to Fujitsu. So can the Minister provide an update on the government's current approach? Now that the public inquiry, I will give way.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way. She mentions the Horizon scandal. Is she of the opinion that the previous government's failure to address the Horizon scandal over such a long period of time and the billions of pounds which have had to be spent since then sorting out the mess have nothing to do with the problems that the financial problems that the Post Office now finds itself in?
Well, I personally don't want to politicise this too much because I think it had gone on for a long period of time, and the inquiry took a lot of evidence last year. I think that the Right Honourable Member for Thirsk and Malton played a remarkable role in exonerating so many people, and I think and setting up the public inquiry. And so my next question to the Minister is if he could provide an update on the what he's hearing through channels as to when the inquiry might publish, because they finished taking public evidence at the end of last year, and I would anticipate they may publish the inquiry sometime later this year. And does he have an update for the House? And then does he have any plans to compensate sub-postmasters and sub-postmistresses who were victims of Horizon's predecessor systems, the Capture and Echo system that predated Horizon? And does he have plans to also quash any convictions arising from those two systems? Finally, in terms of questions, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the spending review, how much public money is he requesting to put in a replacement for the Horizon system? And can he tell us how many post offices currently benefit from small business rate relief and what the government's plans are to continue that throughout this Parliament? Further to the member for Wokingham's question about today's worrying announcement from Ofcom that second-class posts may only be delivered every other weekday Wednesday and not on Saturdays, could he tell us what discussions he's having with Ofcom to prevent this further attack on the demand for our precious postal services? So in conclusion, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we've heard today how incredibly important this precious network of friendly people across our land is to this country. Those 11,500 post offices, the distance requirements that are in place, will the Minister reassure the House, after hearing from so many colleagues, that he will sustain that network throughout the life of this Parliament? Prevention is so much better than cure, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let's all focus on supporting our much-loved post offices in any way we can to continue the wonderful work that they do up and down the country.
Minister, Gareth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I echo the thanks to the Honourable Member for Taunton and Wellington for securing this important debate today. There have been across the House some very clear and consistent messages to the government in this debate, and I pay tribute to the passion with which the honourable members on all sides of the House have raised key constituency concerns. We've heard, as the Honourable Lady opposite alluded to, from my honourable friends for East Dulwich, North Durham, Grimsby, Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, South East Cornwall, Bermondsey and Old Southwark, Chelsea and Fulham, Glasgow North East, Bournemouth West, Leeds South West and Morley. And I know my honourable friend, the member for Manchester Withington, has particular concerns about Didsbury Post Office too. And then similarly we heard from honourable members for South West Devon, for Orkney and Shetland, for South West Hertfordshire, for Didcot and Wantage, from Stockton West, from Boston and Skegness, from Thornbury and Yate. And similarly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I know you have concerns in this space too. Post offices, as honourable members have rightly alluded to, provide hugely important everyday services to millions of people across our country. Communities rightly expect to have access to those essential services just as they would for a GP surgery, a primary school or neighbourhood police. And that's because, as many members have already made clear, post offices are the very beating hearts of our towns and our villages. As our economy has modernised and evolved, so too have our local post offices. Today they are so much more than a place to send letters and parcels. They act as high street banks, as many have alluded to, as access points for some government services, as community hubs for an array of different activities, generating crucial social capital. Indeed, after the unearthing of the Horizon scandal, the nation's unanimous support for sub-postmasters and their campaign for redress and exoneration shows how revered the post office and its workers are by the British public, by all of us. We are working as fast as we can to give sub-postmasters the compensation they deserve and are exploring what further steps we can take. But since the end of June, in just the 6 months that we have been in office, more than 1,000 more sub-postmasters who were victims of this scandal have received compensation. The amount paid out in redress has increased by over £355 million, more than double the amount that had been paid out at the time of the general election. As of the 3rd of January, then, almost £600 million had been paid to over 3,800 sub-postmasters across all 4 main compensation schemes. Also, as of the 3rd of January, the GLO scheme in particular had received 453 claims, of which 370 are fully complete, and the remaining 83 being assessed for their completeness or undergoing a request for further information that would unlock a more generous offer of compensation. We expect then to have paid substantial redress, even if the claims are not fully settled, to the majority of GLO claimants by the 31st of March. But let me be clear to the House, there are still complex cases to resolve, and there is still much more to do in terms of compensation. The Honourable Lady, specifically the Honourable Lady opposite, speaking for the opposition, asked me about capture. And I do make clear that we have identified a number of gaps in the compensation process. We published, in particular, the Coyle report into what had happened in terms of the Post Office use of the capture software prior to the installation of the Horizon system. We are beginning to talk to sub-postmasters who used the capture software about redress going forward so that we can design an effective redress scheme. She may be aware, and indeed the House more generally may be aware, there are a number of cases where there were convictions that appear to relate to use of the capture software by the Post Office that are with the Criminal Cases Review Commission at the moment. The Honourable Lady also asked me about the timing of when we might hear from Sir Wyn Williams' conclusions. We certainly, as she will understand, as government don't want to in any way be seen to be rushing Sir Wyn Williams. We have heard the similar timescale as her sometime later this year, and we will all wait with considerable interest in terms of the conclusions he has to make clear. The Honourable Lady also asked me about the Ofcom consultation. I underlined to the House it is still a consultation. There are some 10 weeks in which Ofcom will be consulting, and as she would expect, we will be fully engaged in that process. On the future of the Post Office, we all know that our high streets have faced huge challenges in recent years, and in some cases the presence of a post office on a high street has been a game changer in driving footfall and attracting custom to other businesses. The public, particularly as many honourable members have already alluded to, often the elderly, those who use cash, who are digitally excluded, rely on the Post Office for essential services. And so it's right that the government holds to account the Post Office to ensure that there is enough postal service provision across the country. I recognise my particular responsibility in that regard. We protect the Post Office network by setting minimum access criteria. Of course, with a network of this size, we are likely to see a fluctuation in the number of branches open at any one time. But crucially, the access criteria ensures that regardless of how the network changes, services remain within local reach of people at all times. The government recognises the key role that post offices play in their communities and how branches in rural areas in particular often act as community hubs. So we are listening carefully to stakeholders to ensure that the whole network, including these branches, is sustainable. And if the Honourable Gentleman will, forgive me, if he's brief.
Just very briefly, does the Minister agree that the manner in which Post Office allowed the information about the closure of directly managed branches to come into the public domain was unacceptable, and what is he doing to ensure that Post Office treats communities with better respect than that in the future?
Well, what I would gently say to the Honourable Gentleman is we are where we are, and I think it's important that we seek to move forward. And I want to come on to the question of the directly managed branches in just a second. To ensure that we're planning properly for the future, we will publish a green paper before the summer to seek the public's views, insights and experiences to help shape the future of the Post Office. In the meantime, we're taking steps to continue to support the network. Along with the annual £50 million subsidy, we have provided a further £37.5 million to support the Post Office next year. Our thinking on the future of the Post Office will also be influenced by Sir Wyn Williams' conclusions. We continue to support and encourage the Chair of the Post Office, Nigel Railton, to shift the focus of the Post Office away from headquarters and to postmasters. The Post Office, with our support, are also reviewing their costs as its financial position continues to be challenging. We're working with the senior leadership at the Post Office on future opportunities, beginning with banking, so that the company can increase its product offers and commercial revenue going forward. The Post Office has set up a new consultative council that will work with the Post Office's senior management on how these new plans are taken forward. It is a first but nonetheless important step to change the culture of the Post Office going forward. Building a sustainable future for the Post Office is imperative. It has had many false new starts. Nearly half of its branches are not profitable or only make a small profit from the post office business. Postmaster pay has not increased materially for a decade. So Mr Railton is looking to deliver both a reduction in post office's costs and, as I've alluded to, an increase in its commercial revenues. He's also set out an intention to transform the service and the support that postmasters receive from the post office, which we have strongly encouraged. He has announced ambitions too for a new deal for postmasters, and I'm pleased that the Post Office recently made a £20 million immediate one-off payment to postmasters to increase their remuneration. I do appreciate, on the question of the future of directly managed branches, that it is very challenging for communities who lose their post office service. I speak from experience, having had Harrow's directly managed branch close in 2016 and transfer to a franchise service instead. And I'm always happy to challenge the Post Office on specific concerns that members have at constituency level. However, the Post Office operates as a commercial business, and the company has the freedom to deliver the branch network within the parameters we set. I know there is concern, as I've said, about the future of D&Bs. I think it's important here to underline that no definitive decisions have been taken on the future of any individual directly managed branch. I have made clear to the Post Office that there must be discussions with unions and other key stakeholders. And I'm pleased to hear that the Post Office has seen positive engagement from independent postmasters and strategic partners who have expressed their interest in taking on D&Bs. It is encouraging that there continues to be such interest in the chance of running a post office. Very briefly.
I look forward to working with him on the future of the franchise in my constituency. Is he aware that there were 373 Crown post offices in 2010, but by 2024 that number had fallen to 115, a figure the Shadow Minister either didn't know or didn't want to admit?
Funnily enough, I am aware of that statistic, and he has made his point very powerfully. We were clear in our manifesto that we would seek to strengthen the post office network in consultation with postmasters, trade unions and customers. And that remains very much our ambition. It's one of the reasons why we're working very closely with the Post Office in providing funding to support the replacement of the Horizon computer system. The Post Office's future lies particularly in cash and banking. With the right support from the financial services industry and engagement with groups such as Cash Access UK, there is clearly more that the Post Office could offer on the high street through banking hubs and the Post Office network. We are beginning to work with the Post Office to improve their banking offer on the high street. Madam Deputy Speaker, the Government is strongly committed to ensuring the long-term sustainability of the Post Office. It is a national asset which provides an invaluable public service in all our constituencies. There are certainly challenges ahead, but we continue to work with the Post Office to ensure that it is fit for the future, and we always welcome views on the network. I thank honourable members opposite for securing today's debate, and I thank all other honourable members for their contributions.
Gideon Amos to wind up.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've learned today that Postman Pat is the model to follow from the member for Dunstable and Leighton Buzzard, that post office services may change, but they mustn't wither, just like Postman Pat himself, I would suggest. We've also heard how much of a trusted institution our post offices are. The word trust has come through several times, a member for Glasgow, North East and Boston and Skegness. And I think we should never forget that it is the staff in those post offices and, of course, the sub-postmasters, postmistresses who are so horrendously treated by the Horizon scandal. It's the staff themselves that make the post offices what they are and what makes them so important to our communities. My honourable friends, members and members across the House are clearly great champions of the local post offices, including my honourable friend for Didcot and Wantage and his post office's Lost Cats service, which I was interested to hear about, and the Thornbury and Yates members' outreach service, and in Orkney and Shetland, the Right Honourable Member to paraphrase him, in my constituency of Wellington, the post office was fixed so many times it was definitely broken, and now we no longer have one at all. And as I said, in a town the size of 15,000 people. And many other members have highlighted the importance of hubs, how post offices are hubs for their communities. The member South West Devon, South West Hertfordshire, Stockton West. And I completely agree with the member for Chelsea and Fulham that the King's Road without a post office seems unimaginable, and I wish him well in his campaign. But I was somewhat disappointed the Minister did not comment on the fact that banking hubs, which are being created around the country, are not providing post office services, despite the fact they have post office written on the outside of the building. And I would very much like to perhaps follow up with the Minister on another occasion to put that case forward, because it seems an obvious solution that must move forward. And securing, as the member of South West Hart said, securing the next agreement for the banking hubs is incredibly important, and we certainly support the government in achieving that. I'd just finally like to congratulate the members on their petitions for North Durham, Bournemouth West, Leeds and Morley, Bermondsey and Southwark, who's also continuing his excellent house-sitting services by sitting in the House this afternoon and making sure this debate went on as it was needed. So my petition for the post office in Wellington, I just leave you with a couple of quotations. I feel so sorry for the people without a car, particularly frail and elderly people. They have to trek in all winds and weathers to the next village several miles away. You see so many villages with their own post office, yet a growing town like Wellington doesn't have one. It's bizarre. Mary said, why was it not considered at the same time as the banking hub? It's run by the same post office. And the first citizen of Wellington, our mayor, said, since 2019, when the post office was closed, at least 2 business owners tried to operate postal services, but found the funding given did not make a viable option, which is why we desperately need a main post office for the town of Wellington of 15,000 people. Thank you, Madam Deputy.
The question is, as on the order paper, as many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes